All right. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's session, Facebook Live with PCA's National Director of Training, Ruben Nieves. We are going to be talking about a very important topic, which I think will be helpful to everyone, especially in this time, which is about filling emotional tanks and the 5-to-1 magic ratio, and kind of more broadly, how do we get the best out of people? And the filling emotional tanks is one of the key parts of doing that. So want to welcome everybody to this Facebook Live session. Again, we're here with Ruben Nieves, our National Director of Training. This is, I think, our third week doing Tips and Tools Tuesday. And so we just want to thank everyone who continues to join us, and for all of the new people, welcome. If you see me looking at my phone at some point during this session, it's because I'm going to be looking for your questions and your comments. So if you guys have questions that you want to ask about emotional tanks, about getting the best out of people, or another topic, Ruben has developed, PCA's content in the workshops that you see, has been with Positive Coaching Alliance almost since the very beginning. We were founded in 1998, and so he is the person to have right now on this session, and we're super excited to be talking about some of these things. So again, if you guys have questions throughout this session, please chat them in the comments area, and we'll make sure that we get them asked to Ruben. But maybe just to kick us off, Ruben, first of all, thank you for joining us. And
Sure.
why don't we just super high level, talk about what is, for someone who's never heard the term emotional tank, what is an emotional tank?
Okay, we all have an emotional tank, and it works kind of like the gas tank in our car. When our emotional tanks are full, we can go a long way. We have the opportunity to perform to our fullest. And so clearly, as coaches, when our athletes are training, and especially when they're competing, and even more so at crunch time, we want their emotional tanks full. It's one of the ingredients that helps them perform to their fullest.
Absolutely. And I love that you made the point, performs to their fullest, because I think sometimes there might be some myths around, the term positive coaching and filling emotional tanks. It could be taken as fluff. But I think that, making the point that it is about getting the best out of people, and in some cases, performance. So I just want to welcome, it looks like Brandon Wald said good afternoon. Hi, Brandon. Ronald, thanks for joining us, Ronald. Molly Whitaker, Jessica Lacayo, Marty Reed, Jason Sachs, Lauren Herring, thank you guys for tuning in. Let us know where you're watching from, too. We love to see where people are tuning in. I think last time we had someone from New Zealand, so love to hear where you're watching from, and thank you again for joining us here for this session with Ruben Nieves, our National Director of Training. So we're talking about emotional tanks and how that can help get the most out of your players or people in your life. I'm curious, many people may have heard of the magic ratio. So the number of positives to negatives when giving criticism or feedback. Can you talk about what is the magic ratio and maybe debunk some myths around that kind of term or tool?
Sure. Love talking about the magic ratio. So, there's been research done in lots of fields, including sports, but also in the classroom, relationships, the business world. And all of those studies say that it takes way more tank filling, praise and other forms of tank filling, to offset anything that drains an emotional tank, like critique or correction or a coach slamming down their clipboard. And I bet most of us can relate to that when the coach was upset with us or when we made a mistake. Phil Jackson referred to mistakes by his players as like an atomic bomb going off. A mistake, or when he critiqued them in some way. It was like an atomic bomb going off. It takes a lot to offset an atomic bomb. So all these studies say way more tank filling. PCA has summarized all that body of research over many, many years, and the target ratio we've come up with is 5-to-1. 5 times as much tank filling as tank draining. Puts kids in the best position to learn and perform. Oh, yep. And then misconceptions.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Misconceptions.
Because I'll say some people watching might say 5-to-1. So if I want to give constructive feedback to my kid, either at home now or if you're a coach, you're like, how am I going to come up with 5 things like right before I give the negative? So talk a little bit about when do you use those 5 to 1?
Okay, those people watching and listening, I want them to identify how many individual pieces of tank filling I give to you, Casey, right now, okay? Casey, I love the way you asked that question. You gave it a lot of thought, and it sets me up to really help the coaches that are listening to us. So I don't know if people who are watching, if they want to chat in something they noticed that I did or said, verbal, nonverbal, that was tank filling communication towards you, Casey, in that moment. Okay, and as we wait for those, the number one misconception about the magic ratio is that some people think, oh, PCA says that every time I interact with a player, every time I give them a piece of coaching, that I've got to give them 5 positives before the piece of coaching or surround it with 5 positives. We're not saying that. Interactions, coaching interactions, can be in any ratio. And there's going to be plenty of times where there's no tank filling in the communication. It's, Casey, we need you to get back on defense. Okay? But over the course of the whole practice, over the course of the whole week, over the course of the whole season, we strive for the 5-to-1 ratio, but not in every single moment and every single interaction. That's the number one misconception about PCA's concept of the magic ratio.
That's such a good point. And I hope that people watching and listening, I think it can sound intimidating when you hear initially that 5-to-1. And then also, you made the point when you were giving the positive feedback just now about the way I asked the question, but eye contact, body language. Talk about maybe some examples.
I used your name. I moved towards you into the camera. I said it with a smile on my face, enthusiasm, passion. Without saying, Casey, I value you and care about you as a professional. Everything about my communication was conveying that to you.
Totally, yeah. And so Luke Andro, who it sounds like you maybe joined us for the first time. Luke, welcome, from Jackson, California. He said your body language and tone added to the positive engagement in addition to the specific positive points that you made. So yes, absolutely. And Luke, welcome to the feed. Alonso Ortega is watching from Ciudad de Mexico, Mexico City. I love it. Brandon in Toronto, Ontario. We have Sean from New Zealand again. Welcome. And Lauren from Philly. Welcome. Danny from Ellensburg. If you guys enjoy these sessions too, I do encourage you to click the share button, share it with other audiences. We hope that you find these sessions super helpful and informative at a time where we have more time on our hands potentially when we're at home. And so just thinking about, doing some professional development and thinking about how can we be most ready when we have the chance to get back out on the field, and then also using some of these tools at home. So maybe,
Casey,
yeah.
Can I quickly greet Alonso? Alonso, un saludo, un abrazo. Gracias por reunir con nosotros hoy. Eres gran entrenador. I know Alonso, so I wanted to send him a direct message. Thanks, Casey.
I love that. And then it sounds like Murray Jones, first time tuning in. So Murray, welcome as well. And from London. Awesome. Murray from London, United Kingdom. Thanks for joining us. So one thing, that I hope, people might find helpful thinking about right now and at home, parents with kids or coaches or interacting virtually, but the concept of, saying good job. Sometimes people say, good job isn't helpful because you're not being truthful and specific. And we talk about truthful and specific praise. Can you talk about, the concept of saying good job and then also that truthful and specific praise?
Yeah, I like that question because it's another thing that sometimes doesn't get fully understood by our workshop participants and even folks who visit our website and stuff. It is okay to tell somebody good job. It is okay to say, well done, Casey. It's okay to be general. It doesn't do harm. Truthful and specific, what we mean by that is that it's way more powerful when your feedback, instead of good job, if I say, that's the way to protect the ball with your body when you dribble, Casey. The specific is, one, it's better teaching and it's more useful. And two, it's the tank filling effect is greatly magnified when the feedback is truthful and specific. But if you can't think of something truthful and specific to say to somebody, and you want to fill their emotional tank, and if you think they did a good job, it's okay to say good job.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I think that you know, Brandon, I just saw your comment. By the way, the Facebook Live interface is way better than Instagram. Thank you. We're doing lots of testing with different technology platforms, but I'm glad that you find this one helpful. And I think, for those of you who are tuning, it looks like quite a few are watching live. Again, if you have questions or issues that you're dealing with at home about, how to best motivate your players, your kids, or provide feedback in the best way possible, write in and let us know, so we can ask Ruben here and we can get to your questions. I see Kelly Spalding joined us as well. Hi, Kelly. Thanks for joining us. And so we've been talking about, saying good job and truthful and specific praise and filling the emotional tank. And obviously you have to correct, certain things for a player, for a child. And so can you talk about, when and how the most effective way to provide that criticism is?
Yeah, well, I guess I'd start with, is it a teachable moment? And there's some moments that are more teachable than others. For example, if you're on a soccer field and you've got 21 other players surrounding you and you're focusing on the ball and your teammates and the opponent and the goal, that's probably not the time for a coach to yell out, make sure that your eyes are on the ball and you strike the ball with this part of your foot. That's not, on the other hand, in practice, in a drill, in a controlled situation where the coach can give you your full attention, maybe that is the right time and place and type of feedback to give. Another thing about correction is at PCA we have this concept of, when possible, critique, criticize, correct in private. And again, there's a lot of times where that makes sense. And by the way, in private does not mean out of sight. In private means quietly in a one-on-one conversation, not around the corner where no one can see what a coach never wants to put themselves in a private situation with a young athlete. Just no reason to ever put yourself in that situation. But there's also times, Casey, where it is okay to correct publicly, and it's good teaching. If you have some information that will benefit all the players, then say it to all of them at one time. Hey, Casey, next time you're in that situation under the basket, I want you to look to the corner to see if the three-point shot is open. Okay? Everybody hear that? So, you want to be efficient as a coach, and sometimes telling the same thing to 11 different players is not as efficient as saying it openly to the whole group. Even though I'm pointing out that you maybe didn't make the decision we want you to make next time. Again, someone said tone earlier, tone. If I say that the way I did with that excited tone that, hey, coach is with you, we're all trying to get better together, I think there are times where correcting in public is actually the right choice.
Yeah, that's super, super great advice. And for those of you who are just tuning in, we're here with PCA's National Director of Training, Ruben Nieves. We're going to be live for another 15 minutes or so. So if you all have questions that you want to chat in, please do so, and we'll get them over to Ruben. One that was just sent in is about, we're talking about criticism and providing feedback. Brandon's asking, what are some pitfalls that coaches can stumble on that accidentally empty an emotional tank? So Brandon's thinking about, and I think that's a great question. I'm sure there's other coaches watching, but are there things that coaches do that they might accidentally drain their tank of their team or a player?
Yeah, really good question. Few come to mind. Excluding, you might not intend to exclude somebody, but and there's sometimes, in basketball, only 5 players get to start. You can't start 10 players in a game. So right off the bat, a coach should be aware that when they send 5 players out to start the game, they're also having 5 players that don't get to start. And I know what that felt like because I rarely started on any team I played on, So just the awareness there. It doesn't mean that, it's part of the sports, it's part of coaching, and athletes have to learn to deal with it positively. But coaching awareness of that, I think, is important. We people can really tend to be sarcastic, and in the sports world, we talk to each other sarcastically so much, and we intend for it to be connection and in a loving way, and to show that you're my friend, and so I can tease you and you can tease me. I think coaches sometimes don't realize that with youngsters it might not be received the exact same way. And, sometimes coaches will make a sarcastic remark about a player and they'll get a bunch of laughter from the team. But you know what? If there's just one person that's not laughing and feeling good about it, then it's not worth it. And usually the person who's the brunt of the sarcasm, even if they pretend laugh and act like it doesn't bother them, it may bother them. So I think being really careful about sarcasm with young people is another one. And then one last one, Casey, that I'll mention is, I guess this has to do with including, excluding, athletes not feeling heard. So PCA talks about ignoring as a tank drainer. And what we really mean by that is athletes feeling like their ideas, their input, their feelings are not being heard by others, including their coach. And so, I think that's one where we can inadvertently drain tanks also, Brandon.
Yeah, that's great. And Brandon said so true. And then also Matthew Snyder said body language as well. Sometimes your body language can empty emotional tanks. And I think that's a great point. I see that Sean Carskadden joined us, Amy Manson, Tara, thanks so much for tuning in. We're going to be live for another 10 minutes or so. So if you have questions, please chat them in. I have a question I was thinking about, coaches and people at home, adults, they're, thinking about how they can fill the emotional tank of the young people that they're around. Is it possible if a coach themselves, like what if the coach has a low emotional tank due to what happened at work? Or, if the coach is coming into a situation where they don't have a full tank, is it possible to self-fill your own emotional tank? Or do you have to have somebody else kind of help fill up that emotional tank? Because I think, I'd be curious too to hear from people who are tuning in have you been in that situation where you're walking into a practice where you have a drain tank yourself as a coach? And maybe how do you work to try to fill your own tank if you're not feeling up there?
Yeah, so I think the ideal situation is that both happen. We're filling our own emotional tank, and we got people around us filling our emotional tanks. When I first became the head coach, men's volleyball coach at Stanford, one of the assistant coaches I chose, he's since passed away, a guy by the name of Al Rodriguez. I picked him for a lot of reasons, but right near the top of my list was that this guy filled my emotional tank as a coach more than anybody I was ever around. And I knew that he was going to make me better. When him sitting next to me on the bench made me better because of what he did to my emotional tank, my self-confidence, how I felt about myself, how I responded to my mistakes. So I think we want people around us that fill our emotional tanks, but you can fill your own emotional tank too. Positive self-talk. How do we talk to ourselves in our head? And because we're doing it all the time, are we encouraging ourselves? Or are we reminding ourselves what a dummy we are? And so I think positive self-talk. For me, Casey, I need to be rested to be at my best. And there were many times before matches that I would take a short nap. As a trainer, when I drive 2 hours to go do a workshop, if I can leave time, this is for me personally, because I know it fills my emotional tank and it puts me at my best. If I can get there early enough to park, recline that driver's seat, and close my eyes for 10 or 15 minutes, I know I enter that workshop with a fuller emotional tank. So I think we can fill our own emotional tanks.
Yeah, I love that. And Johnny wrote in and said the culture of your team should take care of that. Assistant coaches, players should pick you up, and absolutely, I think that's surrounding yourself with people who you know can fill that role as needed. I think is a good piece of advice. And then Matthew said, yes, it's possible to fill your own emotional tank. Patty Duran said, if we don't tell our players the purpose slash story, they will make it up in their own head, usually negatively. So being intentional about, why we're doing the things that we're doing is a great point. And I think too, just thinking about, if there's parents watching, like we always talk about the coaches filling the emotional tanks to the players, but like as a parent, can you fill the emotional tank of the coach, who's going out there to then motivate your kids? And what can you do to maybe say something positive to the coach, offer to help, thank them for the work that they're doing for the kids, but having parents kind of lift up coaches too.
Casey, I couldn't agree more. So many parents go through a whole season without ever thanking their child's coach for anything. Now some, I'm generalizing here. Many parents do that. There's some that are really good about expressing their appreciation and gratitude. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with every decision the coach makes. You don't have to think that they're a great coach. The fact of the matter is they're pouring their time and energy into your child and the children in our community. And here's another one where, you know what, if you can't think of something specific to thank them for, then just thank them. Thank you, Casey, for coaching my kid this season. And, say it quickly and move on. You don't have to make a big deal out of it. It means so much to a coach. And I'll tell you another group that needs to be thanked and have their emotional tanks filled. Do you know where I'm going with this besides the coaches, Casey? The officials. The officials, especially those volunteer officials, or the officials that, are getting paid, minimum wage to ref a game,
Can't have a game without officials.
Just thank them. Just say, thanks for reffing the game today.
Yep, absolutely. So a couple more questions. And again, I'm curious to hear people who are tuning in. Criticism sandwich. So many of you may have heard that term before. I'd be curious to hear, when and if people watching have used that tool in a specific situation and how it's been effective. But could you talk a little bit about, what the criticism sandwich is? It's pretty self-explanatory, but what it is and when that tool can be effective?
Sure. So criticism sandwich, some people call it a compliment sandwich. We call it criticism sandwich. You start with a praise. You put in a correction or critique, and then you end with another praise. Positive, correction, praise. I think that in 2001, I coached the USA World University Games team. We trained in the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs and then went to Beijing, China for the World University Games. I had just learned about Positive Coaching Alliance the year before and PCA tools, including the criticism sandwich, and I got a chance to experiment with some high-level athletes. And one of the ones I used a lot that summer was the criticism sandwich. At first, I struggled because I was too wordy with my criticism sandwich. I found that when I'm coaching players and giving them feedback in the moment in drills after a repetition, that it had to be short and crisp. Once I learned that, way to get your elbow back. Make sure that you strike the ball with your whole hand. I love that follow through. When I learned to make it short and crisp, it worked for me. Time possibly not to use criticism. By the way, tools, you don't use the same tool in every situation for every job. And the criticism sandwich, that's true of the criticism sandwich, Casey. So, but if you decide that criticism sandwich is right for the job or not right for the job, one time where it might not be right, the more things you tell somebody, the less likely they are to remember the one thing that you really want them to remember most. So there's times when I think where if you really want to focus on one piece of feedback, positive or corrective, that you don't surround it with other stuff. Another time not to surround it with other stuff is if you feel like you're doing it just to fluff it up. if you're struggling and reaching, grasping for something positive that isn't meaningful and helpful to the athlete, then I would leave it out. I wouldn't create a criticism sandwich with fluff. But if it's meaningful feedback that is useful to the player and really pointing out something that they're doing well, then I would turn it into a criticism sandwich.
Thank you for that. So Connie said, thank you for mentioning the officials, and a bunch of people liked that comment. So I think that's an important point, that their emotional tank needs to be filled as well. And I do want to make a quick plug. Positive Coaching Alliance actually has an officials online course. It's a 60-minute interactive course that we're going to be opening up for officials or other people who want to learn about being an official to take at no cost for a limited time while people are at home. We've done this with our athlete course. Athletes ages 12 to 18 can go through our online course for no cost. It's 60 minutes. We can post a link here in the feed. So people who are interested in having their kid go through that, we've gotten really good feedback, and we'll be doing one for officials as well. So Connie, hopefully you can spread that to your network as well. So, and then Maria said, that was my role. Thank you for pointing this out. Parent support is critically important. So absolutely, parents' roles in filling emotional tanks with the coach and their kids is important as well. So for the last couple minutes, if there's no more questions, if anybody has any last minute ones they want to chat in, please do. But just any final thoughts about, filling emotional tanks during this specific time, during the coronavirus pandemic, with people being at home, and thinking about many people's tanks probably are a little bit lower than normal, just given what everyone's dealing with. So any advice or thoughts about that for this situation right now?
Sure. Casey, I just wrote a blog for one of our PCA partner organizations, a volleyball organization. I'm drawing a blank of I think they're in Cleveland. Ryan Virtue connected with me with them. And so the blog or article, I wrote the article, 10 things I would do differently if I was the Stanford head men's volleyball coach again. It was hard narrowing it down to 10, Casey, because there's a lot of things I would do differently. But probably the number one thing that I would do differently is I would pay much more attention to the emotional tanks of my athletes. I wish I could go back in time and do that better. I would make sure that every day that I interacted with my athletes, every single one of them knew that I cared about them, not just as a volleyball player who was going to help Stanford win matches and help me advance my coaching career. I appreciated them for that. Don't get me wrong. But that I also cared and valued them as an individual person. And I think that this, the pandemic and the isolation, that's more important than ever. It creates an opportunity. It creates an opportunity that we want to be thoughtful and careful about. Communicating electronically with minors, we want to be appropriate. We want to be thoughtful. We want to be. We don't want to be secretive. But here's a chance for us. We can't work with them in the gym or on the field, but we can continue to communicate with them, ask them questions, and demonstrate to them that we value them, not just as a soccer player or a boxer or a javelin thrower, but as a human being.
That's great. Great final words. There was one other question that came in that I want to get to. Let's see here, Patty. Differences for male versus female teams. Any thoughts about coaching males versus females and emotional tanks and feedback? Anything to share there?
That's such an interesting question, and I'll be trying to figure that one out the rest of my life, along with a lot of coaches. I have coached both men and women, and boys and girls. There's kind of two schools of thought on this, Casey, and everything in between. One school of thought is, wow, it's really different coaching boys than girls. That's one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum is they're athletes, coach them. My experience has been that there is far much more in common in coaching athletes of different genders all along the spectrum than there is differences. You know, when people tell me, oh, these girls I coach, they're just not as competitive as the boys. I think about some of the athletes, the female athletes I got to coach at Stanford: Nancy Reno, Wendy Rush, Barbara Fontana, Teresa Smith, Laura. I mean, I can go on, and they were they were tremendous, tremendous competitors. And if they were going to go down, you better be pretty darn strong and good to take them down, because they could compete and they were mentally tough, they were driven, and they were a
Right.
joy to coach. So, Casey, that's how I'd answer the question. I bet on the chat you get a lot of opinions on that. I think that there's more differences from one athlete to the next than there are from the female gender to the male gender. My
Yeah.
experience.
Good question. Good question, Patty. And if other people have thoughts, yeah, please do chime in. Our time has come, so we are going to hop off the Facebook Live, but thank you guys so much for tuning in. And I will say tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be doing a Facebook Live with WeCoach. They are one of our trusted resources that we work with, and they have done a ton of work around trauma-informed coaching specifically. So trauma-informed coaching, it's going to be with WeCoach tomorrow at 11 a.m. right here on our Facebook page. So mark your calendar. If you've liked our page, you'll get the notification when we do go live. And again, if you find this content helpful, we'd love to hear from you. If you want to see a topic talked about that you haven't heard yet, let us know. Chat that in the comments as well. And then share this with your community. Our hope is that, again, a few times a week we can bring coaches, parents, athletes together to talk about issues that we're all facing right now, and also can help us when we get back on the field. So thank you guys all so much. Murray, thanks from the UK. Yes, thank you for tuning in from United Kingdom. That's so great. So yeah, click share, follow PCA. Ruben, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back with Ruben in 2 weeks. And everybody else, show some love to Ruben here on the feed, and look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Thank you,
Bye.
Casey.